Hello everyone, welcome to Lockdown CISO. Today we talk about the unrest prior to Sino-U.S. Normalization. In February 1972, President Nixon visited China and published Shanghai Communique, paved the way for Sino-U.S. normalization. Based on his initial plan, Nixon, in his second term from 1972 to 1976, Sino-U.S. diplomacy would be resumed or established. Yet in August 1974, Nixon resigned due to the Watergate scandal, and the progress of Sino-U.S. relations stagnated. Meanwhile, China was unstable domestically with gang of four vying for supreme power and cultural revolution, and inactive in promoting relations with America. With Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai blamed for being too gullible to Kissinger and the security promised by America. For the time being, another big issue in China was Deng Xiaoping's resume to power as a vice premier and chief of staff of the army in April 1973, after 6 years of exile. In April 1974, Deng, as China's representative, attended the 6th special session of the UN General Assembly, to which the Gang of Four disagreed. And when Deng Xiaoping arrived at the New York airport, China's representative to UN, Qiao Guanhua, failed in showing up at the airport reception. And Qiao was the designated foreign minister of Gang of Four, so we can see that Qiao's future would be doomed when Deng became China's paramount leader a few years later. In current global situation was the strategic triangle among China, America, and the Soviet. And Soviet and China relations intensified with a few border clashes between them, and the Soviet deployed millions of troops against China and consider surgical strike to China's nuclear facility. In a conversation between Kissinger and Zhou, and Kissinger initially chose the word viability rather than security as to China's situation. Viability emphasizes survival, to be or not to be, yet security means a nation's safety being threatened. Zhou clarified the differences of the two words by checking with the interpreter and told Kissinger that China's issue was security threatened by the Soviet rather than an issue of viability. In February 1973, Kissinger visited back to China and met with Chairman Mao. Mao said to him, "My health looks still okay. Yet I have received invitation from God." During this visit, China and America decided to establish liaison offices in Beijing and Washington, the first step to further embassies and diplomatic relations. China's first liaison to Washington was Huang Zhen, and an American counterpart was David Bruce. Huang Zhen graduated from Shanghai Art School and then joined the military and took part in Red Army's Long March. After 1949, he worked as China's ambassador to Hungary, Indonesia, and then to France. He was promoted to be China's associate foreign minister and the first diplomat to America. David Bruce was an American intelligence officer and a diplomat. Has been U.S. ambassador to Britain, Germany, and to France. He worked as U.S. representative in the secret negotiation with Hanoi during the Vietnam War. When Nixon visited China in February 1972, David Bruce had been considered as one team member, yet China rejected some tricks played by the Americans, or being suspected by the Vietnam for Sino-U.S. bargaining or deal under the table. David Bruce was reassigned to NATO in Europe in September 1974, and his successor at Beijing liaison office was George W. Bush, and the future American President Bush Sr. In the triangle among China, America, and the Soviet, Moscow didn't hope China and America got closer. Washington looked forward to improving relations simultaneously with China and the Soviet. Beijing preferred that an alliance set up by America with Japan, China, Pakistan, Turkey, and Europe, confronting to the Soviet extension together. China had realized America might take advantage with China card for détente with the Soviet, and Moscow would have more free hands to deal with China in the East. In May 1972, and after his tour to China, Nixon visited the Soviet and signed joint declaration, SOT-1, that is Strategic Arms Limitation Talk, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, Mutual Marine Agreement, and Science Cooperation. Totally together is 9 documents. In 1973, Soviet leader Brezhnev visited America and signed SOT-2 and the Treaty of Preventing Nuclear War, demonstrating a two superpower global domination. In September 1973, U.S. State Secretary William Rogers resigned and succeeded by Kissinger. Rogers had been a well-known jurist, a Secretary of U.S. Justice Department in Eisenhower administration. He was nominated as State Secretary in 1969 by Nixon, yet he became to be a State Secretary with least power in American history, for he was excluded from decision-making of Nixon and Kissinger for most tasks of improving relations with China, and the secret mission had been achieved by Nixon. After Kissinger became State Secretary, he worried that intimacy with China might irritate the Soviet for more radical or harsher policy to American-Soviet mitigation. Meanwhile, the current U.S. Defense Secretary Schlesinger believed the relations between America and the Soviet were strong military challenges rather than diplomacy. China, as a strategic partner, could counterbalance other parts of Soviet military forces in Asia. February 1974, Chairman Mao met Zambian President Kenneth Kaunda and talked about the theory of the three worlds. America and the Soviet were superpowers as the first world, Europe and Japan as the second, China and all the developing countries were the third world. After Watergate scandal, the succeeding president fought and visited China in 1975, and without too much achieved, just remained the status quo. On the issue of American-Soviet relations, Ford was criticized for being too weak to Moscow, and Kissinger's détente policy was also to no avail. In 1976, Democratic candidate Jimmy Carter was elected as U.S. president. On October 1st, 2023, Carter just celebrated his 99th birthday in Atlanta, Georgia. And he is the American president with the most longevity. And his wife, former First Lady Rosalynn, just passed away on October 19th, 2023, at the age of 96. During Carter's administration, the priority was also the relations with the Soviet, and also to Sino-U.S. relations, it was just the 27th on his timetable. As to the issues of a global situation and the U.S. foreign policy, President Carter's key cabinet members were at odds. A National Security Advisor, Brzezinski, were regarded as hawkish, who was born in Poland and naturally hostile to the Soviet Russia. He believed China was not strong enough yet and no manners to America for the time being. America and China would cooperate first from economy and trade, and then to coordination of military and security. Meanwhile, U.S. State Secretary Cyrus Vance, elegant and Gentile, being regarded as dovish, yet he had been Associate Defense Secretary during the Vietnam War he was cautious and prudent on Sino-U.S. normalization, this averting its adverse impact to détente with Russia. Vance visited China in August 1977 without any progress made, and even with somewhat flip-flop on Taiwan issue. Brzezinski told Woodcock, this U.S. Beijing liaison officer, to report to himself only about negotiation with China. In May 1978, Brzezinski visited China and showed flexibility and compromise on Taiwan issue, insisting that two countries should focus on the Soviet expansion. During his tour to the Great Wall, he joked with Chinese that who the first who climbed the Great Wall should go to the Ethiopia, Africa, for dealing with the Soviet North Pole Bear. And he was nicknamed by Chinese around as a North Pole Bear hunter. At his farewell party, and Brzezinski mentioned Soviet was the common rival for both China and America. In some important negotiations, Brzezinski always took with his assistant Michael Oxenberg, yet excluded the current Assistant State Secretary Richard Holbrooke. Very similar to the scenario that when Kissinger visited China with Rogers excluded. When Holbrooke asked Oxenberg for the meeting memos, he was rejected based on the instructions from Brzezinski, which aroused Oxenberg and Holbrooke often bicker over the issue. In the second half year of 1978, and China and America accelerated a negotiation for normalization, and following the guidelines set by China that U.S. termination with Taiwan on diplomacy, treaty, and defense. On December 11th, Brzezinski invited Chinese leader Hua Guofeng or Deng Xiaoping to visit America after diplomatic relations established, and Deng Xiaoping agreed. On December 14, 1978, Deng Xiaoping suggested Woodcock that America completely stop arms sale to Taiwan, and Washington promised 1 year only suspense, to which China accepted unwillingly. And on December 15th, China and America published a joint declaration for diplomatic relations. For a long process of negotiations, even at the last phase, U.S. State Department didn't get engaged. Brzezinski believed the State Department easily leaked information and impeded negotiation. President Carter said that he did so due to he had no support from the State Department. The position of State Secretary Vance was tremendously inflicted due to his being neglected on this issue, and he resigned later when he disagreed with President in dealing with Iranian crisis in 1980. At 9 p.m. Friday, December 15th, 1978, President Carter announced establishment of diplomatic relations with China since January 1st, 1979, and mutual sending ambassador from March 1st. Carter said America would hold the position of one China and Taiwan as part of China. America and Taiwan would remain non-governmental relations, and the U.S. Congress passed Taiwan Relations Act in March 1979. Most Americans supported the government decision, yet still with some different voices heard. In Chinatown, New York, among thousands of participants in parade, two opposing sides could be seen, some with the celebration and some utterly protested. As the saying, nothing happens by chance. Nature will always take its own course. During the 30 years of Sino-U.S. wrestling power from 1949 and New China to 1979 diplomacy, the mutual, the rough and tumbling, demonstrated national interests, national power, diplomacy maneuvering, and all kinds of conflicts. The above is today's program, and thank you for your joining in, and see you next time. Thank you, bye.